Now, I'd like to welcome today Alex Paik, who's a pretty old friend of mine at this point, a great artist and a really inspiring, innovative gallery director and founder of Tiger Strike's Asteroid, which has multiple locations across the country. Alex Paik, reading the bio from his website, with his permission, is an artist living and working in Los Angeles. His modular paper-based wall installations explore perception, interdependence, and improvisation within structures while engaging with the complexities of social dynamics. He has exhibited in the US and internationally with notable solo projects at Praxis New York, Art on Paper 2016, and Gallery Joe. His work has also been featured in group exhibitions at Bravenley Projects, Leslie Heller Workspace, and Monopractice, among others. Paik is founder and director of Tiger Strike's Asteroid, a nonprofit network of artist-run spaces, and serves on the advisory board at Trestle Gallery, where he formerly worked as gallery director. He was also the curator of the Satellite Art Show in Miami from 2015 to 2018. I'd like to welcome you. Thank you so much for agreeing to join us in between all your duties.
Glad to be here. Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Sorry I couldn't be there live.
Yeah, of course. Totally understand with two children to work around and all these responsibilities and this new move. Oh my goodness! Thanks so much. Your time is valuable. So I wanted to start off by asking you a few questions. We're very interested in getting a window into the world of curation, but also just to get to know your practice as a visual artist and how you balance those two things in your life, both time-wise and just how you sort of conceptualize both how separate or kind of entangled they become. So the first question is to ask you about TSA. You started out originally as a visual artist, making work independently in your studio and showing in gallery exhibitions. Over time, you've built up this really successful artist-run gallery ecosystem, Tiger Strike's Asteroid, or TSA. I think you have 5 locations at this point around the country.
Yeah, that's right.
Talk a little bit about how this all happened, how it was initiated, and at this point, what is the relationship between your ongoing creative practice in your studio and managing the gallery?
Yeah, so I can talk very briefly about TSA. So really, it just started out as a small artist-run space in Philadelphia. We had no plans to expand or become like this sort of like national network like we are now. It was really just like me and 5 other friends, and we wanted to kind of create a space where we could show the kind of work that we wanted to show that we felt like wasn't being shown at that time in Philly. The artist-run scene there was not nearly as robust as it is right now. So there wasn't enough space, frankly, for artists to show there. So we started it with the intention of bringing in curators and artists from outside of Philadelphia to Philly, so that we can sort of like start to connect people with people that they would not meet otherwise, and sort of start to build these relationships. And then I moved to New York because of my wife's work, and we started a space there. And we're just kind of like, what should we call it? And like, haha, we should call it TSA. Like, what? That would be kind of funny. So that's kind of how the network got started. Kind of as a joke, to be honest. And then quickly after that, we had some folks in LA and Chicago that wanted to start spaces. And then a few years after that, we had a group in Greenville, South Carolina. That was started by one of our oldest members, or most senior members. I'm not sure what the proper way to say it, but he had been a member for a long time. He was moving down there. He wanted to start a project down there. So yeah, it all kind of like happened like organically and accidentally, to be honest. But it really is just like, I really view it now as like this sort of structure for building relationships. And I think that sort of like impetus from the beginning, it kind of like became the seed for like the sort of like the underlying like philosophy of the organization. And especially now, like while most of our spaces have been shut down, it's been really like clarifying for me to think about the organization, like it's not even necessarily about the shows that we put together or the projects. Like it's really about creating this community and being a part of the community, and having like giving artists the agency to one, like create the shows that they want to, and to like sort of carve out a part of the art world that they feel okay being a part of, if that makes sense. And so that like kind of like segue into my own practice, that kind of you know, that's like kind of what helps keep me like going in the studio. You know, it's there's so much like upsetting to use an understatement about the art world right now, and it's very easy to become like sort of cynical and bitter as an artist, but I think it's really essential that you have like a community as an artist, because like otherwise you're not like, it's hard to work even if you have time to work. So although I have less sort of total time in the studio, I feel much more like much like happier and less bitter to be in the studio. So I'm like actually driven into the studio by being like inspired by the community that we've created, and the artists that I've gotten to work with. And you know, also it all kind of like mixes together. You know, every sort of professional opportunity I've had for my work is at minimum like indirectly related to TSA, if not like directly. You know, it's from people that I've met through TSA, because it is just like a structure for building relationships and connecting people. And I think the other question you had was how to balance it all. I don't balance it all at all. I actually do a horrible job. One thing that I have been trying to tell myself, especially also as like a parent and like the primary caregiver of our two kids, it's you know, I think of it like more in terms of like seasons. You know, like there's seasons where I'll have you know, I'll have a project looming, so I'll have to do more studio stuff, and then that means that you know, I frankly won't be putting as many hours into TSA stuff, and I won't be doing as good of a job there, or like I'll have to like pull away from family time and work on weekends or something, and that means I'm being sort of you know, less of a parent, right? But you know, like in like, and then sometimes the opposite happens where like there's like a really big TSA project that we're working on, so that means my studio practice will fall by the wayside for a season, right? I think right now, especially for most parents, like it's a season of really being with your family and just taking care of your kids. Especially I have a newborn, so she's like super needy. Like I have to carry her all the time, all day long. So right now is a season where I have to focus on my family, and that means that, you know, TSA I'm just like barely holding on. Studio I'm like kind of just barely holding on. So I think for me, like, and this is me like also like talking to myself, trying to convince myself that this is the right way to think about things. But that's kind of like how I try to think about it. If you try to think about like balancing things and making sure you have X number of hours in the studio and then X number of hours doing admin stuff, I feel like it just drives you crazy.
Great. I mean, it is amazing to me how much you seem to be able to. I mean, in this collective sort of sharing of skills and labor, at least on the TSA side, it's amazing to me how much you can accomplish. And I'm just thinking of all the, you know, the range and you know, and the slew of exhibitions that you guys have put on, even in just the New York space. There's been a lot of really inspiring shows. I'm really amazed at what you managed to do. Not even to speak to your musical career. And your career's other types of identities in the world.
You're like one of the few people that know about the brief musical thing.
Where you were your band was opening for the Roots, like that is incredible. That is incredible. What was it? What was it called? Nouveau Riche? Nouveau Riche? Yeah, that's an incredible sideline. Anyway, that's very inspiring. So yeah, so I wanted to ask, how would you define the role of, like, when you actually curate shows? This is different from running a space. This is kind of like separate. I'm sure it's overlapping, but when you're actually running TSA and balancing the books and scheduling all that stuff, this is probably a very different thought process than actually putting together an exhibition, playing the role of curator. How do you think about that job of being curator? Like, how do you plan things out? And especially if you're doing like a themed exhibitions, or even better, themed group exhibitions, as we'll be doing, how do you go about planning that? How do you choose work? I mean, what's the thought process you go through?
Yeah, can I share my screen? I can show some past projects.
You should be able to now.
All right, great. Yeah, so I tend to like, I mean, I know you're using the word curating. I tend to not like really think of myself as a curator. I think that I minored in art history, but I don't have the sort of academic background to be like a more traditional curator. I mean, I think of myself more as like kind of organizing shows. But I think like as an artist, like I tend to organize shows less like with like a concept, but more like kind of like with like sort of like I don't know, poetic connections or something, or these sort of like loose themes that like kind of can go in any direction. So a lot of my shows I feel like have looked pretty different. Like they'll have all sorts of different work in it, and I try to be pretty mindful of that. So this was an exhibition I curated in 2017, I think. It was called Lost Cause, and this was all artists that these were all artists that tried to do something impossible in their work, in their process, or something like that. So like, for instance, here, this painting right here, this is Jeff Vachera, who has this series of representational paintings that he paints from life, and he's trying to paint like those holographic shopping bags, which is like literally impossible to do. And then on the right here is a Mark Lombardi drawing, and he was an artist that would sort of like try to map out like the connections between like politicians and dark money, and like just sort of map out where all the money was flowing to and from. And this was a piece by Alex Arst. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing her name right. That it's supposed to approximate the smell of space. Which is impossible to really smell anything because it's a vacuum. And then this piece right here was by Curtis Wallen, and this was a project of him trying to make an untraceable cell phone call. So the project ranged, so when I am thinking of shows, generally I think of like some sort of like concept or idea, and just kind of let my mind wander from there. And I try not to think of it. I don't really think about like how it looks visually until I have the work in the space, and then I try to like work around that. Because generally the shows are not about anything visual, but it's about some sort of like underlying idea, or some sort of underlying connection between the work. Yeah, I tend to take my time with shows. Like I'll have like just like a little notepad with like a list of artists, and I'll sort of like whittle it down and add to it like over several months, just to, or over years sometimes, just to like sort of really cull it down. So this is one of our newest projects called TSA PDF, and these are printable exhibitions. So it's still kind of a show, but you can also, like, people can print it and download it and then hang it however they want. So this kind of takes the idea of like, traditionally when you curate a show, like you put this painting here, this sculpture here, this painting here, and that layout remains fixed. But in these shows, the layout is not fixed. You can hang them however and wherever you want. So that really like sort of like was an interesting way to think about curating. And this show is called Distance, and this is all artwork. Our artists that were thinking about, I just kind of used the word distance as a starting point. It was at the beginning of the shutdown, and we were thinking about 6 feet apart or being distanced from our loved ones. So, some of these folks, like, it's literally, the work is literally about like distance between forms, right? Some are about like the distance between like translating from one language to another. Some are about like, like this middle one is a piece by Jesse Chun, and it's from a series of found immigration papers that she would erase all of the text from. So it's like this weird abstract grid. So it's about like moving. This piece by Oscar Goto is, this series is about her working with her father's old photographs. So it's like about the distance between, a father and a daughter, and a distance between like the memory of like old snapshots and like what actually happened and like your memory and the distance between that, and then this one is like Liz Nurenberg. She makes these sort of performance pieces where you can, like, generally like two bodies have to interact with each other. So this is much more like a physical or a literal manifestation of that concept. So that's kind of how I tend to think about it, about shows. The last one I'll show you. So this was a co-curator with Mark Joshua Epstein. And this was called Surfacing. And on this, this gallery, I wish it didn't go automatically, that's okay. So this gallery has a very, very certain aesthetic. So everything kind of has to look a certain way. But within that, we wanted to curate a show that talked about, basically the concept was to bring artists, to ask the question like, well, like what do artists, like why do artists from marginalized communities, either gender marginalized, racially marginalized, whatever, like why do they use this sort of formal language of abstraction, and what are the different canons that they're coming from, and like what sort of like additional nuance and richness do they bring to the table, as someone that is working like both outside of and within this sort of like traditional white Western canon. So that was the concept for this show, and this show was interesting because we had to work with the gallery, right? So I think we initially approached them with about 12 artists, and they kept asking us to cull it down. So then, we had to, when that happens, you have to kind of like really think about like, okay, like who do we really need in the show? And then you have to really think about it visually, right? And you have to think about like, well, if we have such a limited space, then we have to try to we want to show the broadest range possible in order to sort of like show that this concept is not just about like some sort of like visual rhyming or sort of visual affinity. So we got rid of artists in the culling process that already kind of look too similar, or like we're working in a similar way to like another artist that we wanted in the show. So that's always like a difficult decision to make, especially if you know the artist personally, because you don't want to be biased one way or the other. So that's kind of like a brief introduction, and I'm happy to like go into more detail too if you want more like nuts and bolts advice too.
That's it. I mean that in itself, you've shown a really great range of exhibitions. I mean, each is like so kind of coherent in terms of like how it responds to a theme. I think they're all very kind of conceptually grounded, or they're all very tied in really clearly to this particular theme. Though the theme seems like a sort of broad net that you cast over before kind of narrowing things down. But I think in each case, it's like, I mean, it's exactly what we'll be doing as well. I love the Lost Cause show. I remember I was at the opening to that one. I think, or I saw it during the month, and it was like, yeah, that was a really great show. I haven't seen the install shots of Surfacing yet, so I think, yeah, like what a great range of encounters with a group exhibition. And the PDF exhibitions has been, I think, pretty exciting. I've been happy to benefit from those, since I'm a sustain, what do you call it? Okay, like a Patreon supporter of TSA, yeah, to a very small monthly amount, but it's worth it just for the PDF shows. Although I haven't printed them out yet because I don't have very good color printing options right now, so I've been dragging my heels.
I don't either. Yeah, I always have to do it black and white, but
yeah, I kind of want to do it black and white, but then I want to wait for anyway. I'll probably do it soon. Yeah, these are great exhibitions, and yeah, I mean, you've given us a really complete sense of how you whittle things down in terms of like who you who you choose, like the artists that you kind of call into these to these projects. I mean, you probably are starting out with having a few people in mind right off the bat, like people that you know or people whose work you've seen. Like, how do you go around searching for new work? Is it like, is there ever a point where you're like
Yeah,
looking at like artist databases, or I mean, how do you cast
yeah.
around for works
I
to
mean,
fit in?
I don't really look at databases that often. I mean, I see a lot of work just like from my day-to-day life as now. I mean, now I don't see like anything. It's all on Instagram. But this is where like having those like sort of lists that I talked about like comes in handy, because like usually there'll be like a flurry of inspiration and you'll just write down like as many names as you can think of, and then like over, as you're just going about your daily life, like you'll be like, oh, this piece would be perfect. Like I'll see something on Instagram or something, or like my friend will post a show that they saw or something. So that's how like sort of slowly over time it happens. And then, like I've been trying to more and more really think critically about like who I'm inviting to, and like trying to be certain that there's a good like amount of diversity within all the shows, unless like there's a very, very specific reason for there not to be. So that's another thing that I will keep in mind. Um, so that's, I guess that's like generally how I will find work, is just not through like databases, but I'll like through friends shows, or like I'll look at artists that I admire and see what shows they've been posting, or I'll kind of go down these like sort of like Instagram rabbit holes, just sort of trying to look at things.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. I mean, generally it starts with a few artists that I have in mind, and I'll start to be like, oh, like this would be a cool show if I could like, sort of tease out this part of the work that I really, really like, and like wonder what other artists would fit into that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm kind of thinking about, I think people in our class will have problems like, where do I get my artists? And of course, we're
Yeah,
looking at all these museum and gallery websites throughout. But I guess in some ways, the experience of putting together a show is still partially localized in the sort of social media, or like online life that we all have. Like, you're still kind of building based on what you're seeing online or on social media and those kind of places. So it isn't necessarily just for the fact that we're living, we're doing this kind of distance ed this semester, that will be casting around online. This
right.
online life that we have is still part of the process for you on a day-to-day
Yeah,
level,
yeah,
even when we're able to be together physically,
right.
bodily.
Yeah, I
Okay,
mean,
yeah.
like definitely, like when I could see shows, like that would be part of the process too. Like, because I would just go to shows semi-regularly, and I wouldn't have it in mind like, okay, I'm going to find an artist for this, but just like in going around, you'd be like, oh, that's this. I didn't know this person's work, or I forgot about this person's work. Like, this would be perfect for it. So that like sort of uh, supplements the sort of social media stuff. But like obviously you can just scroll through like so much more artwork, um, on social media than you can, walking around and looking at galleries. And I guess like as artists, like you can kind of like, it's not the same as seeing it in person, but I think we're all smart enough as artists, to be able to reverse engineer like kind of what the physical feeling would be like, like, or at least somewhat approximate it. Um, so yeah,
So what I'm kind of getting out of here is that, number one, I think it sounds like it's good to start out with like more artists than maybe you need in the show, for
yeah, for
whatever
sure.
reason, and
Yeah,
then you can kind of call that down to try to make a clearer, more dramatic statement that organized around whatever central principle. So that means
right.
maybe taking out the things that are similar to one another, and trying to pare things down so there's the greatest kind of contrast visually,
Yeah, yeah,
the greatest kind of the greatest kind of contrast between the various
right.
works. And it sounds like
Or
sometimes, oh, go ahead.
yeah, and then or sometimes like, a lot of times looking at the artist's work will tighten the concept for you, right? So like, the concept shouldn't be this concrete thing, right? Maybe there's like, maybe like you're just like, oh, there's like 1,000 artists I can think of for this, so maybe that means that this theme is a little too broad, or maybe it should be broad, or so then if it's too broad for whatever the context of the show is, right, then maybe you can tighten it up and be like, okay, well, what sort of like out of this, within this concept, maybe I can tease out just like a very specific part of this initial idea I had instead, right? Like maybe there's like just a handful of artists that I think will really tease that specific part out, rather than being like this, like, no, like I have to do this concept and like I'm going to do it no matter what. Like it has to be like kind of open-ended both ways, I think.
Cool. So the concept can change and narrow down from broad to more specific. And I feel like that does make a more coherent, meaningful art experience. And sometimes it sounds like you also start with not really even a clear concept, but maybe an artist or two that you really are interested in. And then in the coupling of two or more works, you're able to kind of tease out a concept from there. Is that is that a way of working, would you say, as well?
Like yeah, like sometimes you'll like be like, oh, this would be great to see like this and this together. Like I'm not sure why yet, but I feel like it would just look great together, right? And then you can kind of sort of tease out like what is it that you like I'm thinking about as I look at these, and then you could bring more folks into the mix. Yeah, so it doesn't always have to, it's not always like top down, like concept to artist. Like it could be like a sort of like visual thing or some sort of poetic connection between two works that sort of sparks the idea.
Great. Well, thank you for that. I think you've given us a really clear, I don't think we need to get more nuts and bolts as far as like, pairing actual works together. Although I would be interested, but maybe we don't take the time here. But I think conceptually and how you think about themes and establishing a show, we've gotten a really great depiction that will help us gain some momentum going forward. So I just wanted to ask also, I mean, you've already spoken a little bit to the frustration with the, the kind of, underlying kind of structural racism that manifest on every layer in every aspect of the art world. And I wonder if you want to say more about that. I mean, we've been talking from the ground up somewhat about the kind of exclusionary art historical narratives that are propagated by museums, and sort of like the idea that that's what they do. And one job of artists and art critics and art historians can be to expand that narrative and bring in other voices to those histories. But I think something that you've been thinking about and talking about somewhat over the past years is that, on all layers of arts administration, art dealing, the kind of gallery culture and everything, that these iniquities are just as visible. And you've already spoken to this, but I also wanted to congratulate you and say that I'm very thankful that you've co-founded the organization and another to, as a way of actually speaking or advocating, I guess, for the Asian and Asian American experience in the arts culture. And I wonder if you'd like to speak to those, for those of us among the students who are interested in going into this field and are going to meet the same kind of exclusionary practices, the same structural racism. Like, how are you thinking about it now? And can you give words that would give people some comfort or like hope entering into the fray?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's a very complicated subject. But yeah, I mean, I think like the first thing is like, it's like white supremacy is not like this, like, it's not like I don't remember who said this, but it's not like a shark in the water, right? It is the water. Like we're all swimming in it and we're all complicit in it, like, so like in terms of art, just to think about like your education, at least my education, like I read like mostly like white male thinkers and looked at mostly white male artists. But it was presented to me as like, oh, this is just the canon. This is the neutral canon, right? When they should have said this is just like the white canon, right? And I think like just even from the beginning, you're so young and you just want to listen to your teachers or not. But there's this weird power relationship there when you're younger, for sure. So you just like eat it all up, right? And it took me many years to realize that it was just like all a complete lie. A lot of the art world, most of the art world is based on this lie that that the work that is successful is like based on this sort of neutral taste, or that galleries or institutions have neutral taste, when in fact they generally have white taste with a little bit of diversity sprinkled in, just to like not get called out on Instagram long enough until it's like not trendy again to show Black artists, right? So yeah, so it's, I think like the first step is like recognizing that most of us have been given this white lens to look at not only the art world, but the world at large through. That's just how we've been taught. And I guess that's a little bleak. But yeah, I mean, I think like I think what needs to happen, you know, like people in power have never willingly given up their power. Like, I think we can't expect like these large institutions to be like, oh, you know what? We were wrong. You're right. We'll just give up our power, right? And we'll just like change everything. Like, it's never happened that way. I think that it's always been like grassroots level organizing that has changed things. So I think that really it's up to like your students and like you know, even like the next generation after your students to sort of build and reimagine like these new institutions. You know, like we're trying to do it at TSA, and you know, like we're doing our best, but like we're also like we're all like old farts, and like it's hard for us to change, you know. And like, you know, like even if we can, like, you know, like as I've been trying to do, is like try to have a more nuanced view and like teach myself you know, multiple canons. There's still kind of that scar tissue of like looking through a white lens, you know. Like, even though I recognize it, like even if you can name it, it's hard to like fully extract that from yourself, I think. So I think like I really think that it's like these sort of like up to like sort of younger spaces to sort of reimagine what institutions could look like, and what galleries could look like. And so I lost my train of thought.
Well, it seems like you are, on that note, it seems like you are, you're noticing other artist-run spaces that feel like they have some of the promise of new directions, and
Right.
and maybe specifically, it's for artist-run spaces to exercise the kind of freedom and the new directions, because they're not so hinged to the monthly, like the monthly sales, that they don't have to like, they're not always kind of dedicated, you know, forced to make this certain number of sales. They're not tied to the secondary market the same way. I mean, do you think it's artist-run spaces that are the future?
Maybe. I mean, you know, I've been thinking a lot about that. Like, what is the difference between an artist-run space and a commercial space, right? Especially if like on the surface they look very similar. Their websites are like nice enough and they put objects onto white walls. And what I've been thinking about recently is that artist-run spaces, at their core, they're these communities of cooperation. You could call them like kind of like mutual aid groups in a certain way, where artists are chipping in their finances, their resources, and their labor in order to mutually benefit each other, their local communities, and then sort of the art community at large. But I think that what happens is, because white supremacy in the art world is so pervasive, and this sort of like smoke and mirrors, you know, act is so pervasive, a lot of artist-run spaces, they don't question what they're building. Do you know what I mean? Like, and they just sort of end up replicating whiteness and white supremacy. They just end up replicating the same thing that's happening in the commercial art world, you know? So I think it's very important to, so it starts with this sort of like great philosophy, but then it ends up just replicating, you know, whatever it is you're trying to be an alternative to. So I think it's important to define very explicitly what you're trying to be an alternative to, and what your core values are as an organization, and then let the work sort of flow from there, if that makes sense. And so that's one thing I've been thinking about with artist-run spaces. So I think they do have potential. You know, I don't think there's that many that are really really doing things that are like new. You know, like a lot of them are just like, they're just like really under-resourced commercial galleries, which is like a horrible place to be. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, somewhat hopeful, somewhat bleak.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I guess the hopeful thing is like I feel like what I've been telling students a lot recently is that, you know, if you can recognize that like most of the art world is trash, yeah, like then you're just free. You know, you just make like the community that you want, you know, and like make a part of the art world that you want to be a part of. And like I know for me, like I've been thinking about like, man, I like wasted so much time like over the years, like trying to network with people that are just like horrible people because I thought it would be good for my career. Like, you don't even have to worry about that. Just like build your own little corner and like be with good people. And then like, I think collectively, like, you know, those groups start to commingle and then you can do bigger things. And collectively, that's how I think like, you know, maybe not like systemic change will happen, but at least like you'll feel okay with yourself and you can like sleep at night and you'll have like a small community of artists that like that you can like trust and can like work with and like be excited about their work and they can be excited about your work. You know, I don't know, maybe that's enough, but
It's definitely feeling like it's enough for me at this stage in my
yeah.
in my tired life. But thank you so much for I mean, you've done so much to kind of give a lot of people courage in that regard, that it can be enough to build community among your peer group, and that's, I mean, it's doing a lot, Alex, I gotta say.
Thanks.
So yeah, so thanks so much for your time. I've taken much more of your time than I wanted to monopolize today. Have a great, what day is it? Saturday? Yeah, whatever's day. And yeah,
Groundhog's Day.
yeah, you have the entire day ahead of you now. However the time change works, I think you have more time today than I do now. But thanks so much. I really, it's going to be so meaningful for all of us in you know, just in general, but also helpful for these projects that we're beginning to work on. So
Cool.
thanks a lot. Say
Thanks,
hi
Brian.
to the family.
Oh yeah, I could show you them after we're done
Okay,
recording.
I will close this off. Yeah, thank you so much. Signing off.